Silence.
All right, and welcome back to the Big Silence podcast. So happy you're here and keep coming back each week. Unfortunately, my sidekick, Bobby Goldstein, my executive handyman, is out doing handyman things with Big Bob. That's his dad. If you see me talking about it on social media, there's Little Bob and then Big Bob. But you know, Big Bob is no longer Big Bob. We call him Skinny Bob now. Hey, Emily's sitting next to me. You know, Big Bob lost 120 pounds in the last few years.
You're serious?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
How? That's what everyone wants to know. I think he needs a program in the Tone It Up app.
That would be incredible. We should get him in here.
You know what? I should do a podcast with Big Bob because everyone wants to know how Big Bob became Skinny Bob after retirement.
Awesome.
He's awesome. He's funny. He might need like is it a Miller Lite? Is that what Big Bob likes?
Is New York accent?
Yeah, he's from Long Island. The Bobs. We should have both the Bobs on.
That'd be right.
But anyways, the Bobs are out doing Bob things. So I am here and wanted to, first of all, mention on October 9th, is that Sunday, October 9th. So October 10th is World Mental Health Awareness Day. So the Big Silence is doing an event on that Sunday before, which is October 9th, in Fredericksburg, Texas. Now, it's a winery, and don't be shocked. If you live in Austin or around Texas wines, it's like the second, don't quote me on this, the second largest, I don't know, winery. You always have, what is that called? Like where wines grow? Wine vineyards, grapes, next to Napa. And they're really good. And so Bobby and I went one weekend for the first time in Fredericksburg, and we were at one winery. And then somebody there was like, "Oh, we're going across the street to something called Slate Theory Winery." They're like, "You should go there. It's amazing." So we were like, "Okay, we'll go across the street." And we sit down in the tasting room, and then we start noticing the names of the wines, the manic, the schizophrenic, all these mental health terms. And then we were reading the bio, and then we went and asked someone, we're like, what is the correlation with mental health and the winery? So we ended up meeting the father and one of the sons and just chatting with them about mental health and why they started this winery. And, you know, their whole thing is, you know, fill your head with full sensory experience that manifests in the form of psychologically stimulating wine. And it is. So cool. And one of the sons, Cody, he's an artist, and we purchased some of his art, his paintings. Incredible. But anyways, we became friends with this family, bonding over mental health and stories. And, you know, now that World Mental Health Awareness Day is approaching, we decided to do an event together at the winery, but not just the winery, in the cave where nobody gets access to. And so I want you to join us in Fredericksburg, Texas. If you're here, close by, if you're not at Austin city limits, forget Austin city limits, that state. We're saying we can come hang out with us. My friend James Kinney, who you know from the Big Silence theme song, he'll be performing. And my friend Amber Valdez is going to be doing a sound bath meditation. And the acoustics in the cave are incredible. So, and then I'll be speaking about mental health and all of that fun stuff. And yes, we will be sipping on some wine. So go to thebigsilence.com for all the details, or on Instagram. I'll be talking about it a lot, but I really do hope you can join us there. All right. And today's guest is Koshin Paley Ellison. He has devoted his life to the study and application of psychotherapy and Buddhism. He's the author of Zen Teacher, and he is also the co-founder, alongside his husband, of the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. He has a new book coming up called Untangled. It is coming out November 8th, 2022. And we talk about his book. We talk about death. Such a fun topic, but it's something that is an interesting perspective coming from the monk's perspective on death. And obviously, his Zen Center is for contemplative care. We also talk about generational trauma. Koshin has some similar lineage, as he has some Ukrainian in him as well. and meditation tips and more. So I hope you enjoy this episode. And as always, like, comment, share to anyone who you think may want to hear. All right. See you on the flip. All right. Welcome to the big silence, Koshin Paley Ellison. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I'm feeling very tender and connected and happy to be here with you.
Yeah. And you're funny. In the first few minutes that I met you, I was like, where are you at? You're like this small island of Manhattan. I'm like, oh, I thought you were in New York. Duh. But anyways, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. You're a monk, but like super cool, everything that you do and your knowledge. And we're talking about not only your new book, Untangled, coming out, but as I was going through your book and then everything you do, and I have so many questions that I hope we can get to it all. But I would love if you would start and kind of talk about your upbringing, which is so descriptive in your book. And that's why I feel like I love the storytelling and then connecting it to lessons. And so if you can share a little bit about your upbringing.
I could.
But you don't have to.
No. I'm wondering, anything in particular that you're curious about?
Well, how you got to where you are today. And actually, I don't know, before we started recording, you mentioned kind of a portion of a quote of your parents cut us so deeply that, and what was that quote again?
It's a paraphrase of that wonderful mythologist named Michael Meade, who I've had the pleasure of, learning from at a period of time. And he said, our parents cut us so deeply that it sets out a direction for our life, for healing. And in some ways, a question that we have, like an essential question, that what is life about? And that's definitely true for me. I think that coming from my background, where my essential question was always and continues to be, how do we tend to the gap and nourish the gap between what we value and what we're actually doing, between our actions. I love that, I practice in Buddhist tradition, and in there where we're most interested in is, doesn't matter what you say, it matters what really your actions are, your true belongings, like what you actually do. And so I grew up in a very traumatized family.
Mm-hmm.
And so as is very common for migrant families or families who had to flee for persecution or violence and war, slavery, all of these different things, there's this epigenetic trauma of those events. And so my family.
Are you first generation here in the US or second?
Third.
Third, okay.
Yeah. But it really just keeps going. Mm-hmm. It keeps going strong. And so I grew up with stories of, our family and their neighbors being, rounded up into barns and set on fire by their neighbors, so like it was not even Nazis, it was neighbors before the Nazis came.
Where's your family from?
From Ukraine, Hungary, and Poland. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm Ukrainian, second generation. And I understand that generational trauma and what my grandparents went through. My grandparents were actually pregnant with my dad when they made it to Ellis Island in New York. And yeah, the story's there. I write about it in my book as well. But yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So it's just very powerful. And, also sometimes we often talk about epigenetic trauma, which is very important, but I also feel that what I've come to realize more recently is the epigenetic courage that I feel like in many ways, and happy to explore it, to things that I had experienced as a young person, that somehow I had the courage to keep going, where I think that other people in my family didn't have that courage. And so I feel like that, where did that come from? But I feel like it also came from these family members who also realized we have to get out of here. And everyone thought they were crazy for leaving. Like, that's not going to happen here. Everything's going to be fine. And so there's that courage of listening and trusting ourselves. And so I also feel grateful for that. And so I grew up in this family of like beautiful, they're actually really wonderful people. They have beautiful values. They've done great things in the world, and yet terrible things would happen. And so there was a big discrepancy, and where, there was, domestic violence, sexual violence, verbal violence, emotional violence, that I grew up with, that was so wrenching. And most of it, I actually, because I was the youngest, I got to observe and learn how to navigate things. But it was really not until, when I was 8 years old, actually, I went to see my grandpa George, and he used to save National Geographics when they used, I don't even know if the magazine still exists, but
I think it
in
does.
ancient times, there was this actual magazine, and at that time, there was like lost native tribes, and lost indigenous. And every once in a while, they had a spread of a city, and they had one of Tokyo. And I just remember I was 8 years old, and I was laying on my back and on my belly with my grandpa. Was laying on the floor in their white shag carpet with the white bean bag. And it was like that time, the 70s and 1970s, not the 1870s.
Of course.
And I remember flipping this page and just seeing this picture of this monk. And he had this, what's called an Rogasa hat. It's like this big, wide, bowl-shaped hat where you can't see the person's eyes, where you see their mouth. They have this slight smile. He's wearing robes. And in the picture, everyone around him was blurred. And because they were just like running around in suits. And then the bottom of I still remember reading, like, at the caption of the photo, was Zen Buddhist monk in Tokyo. And I thought, I want to be that.
So then how do you go from that I'm going to do it to I'm here now at the New York Zen Center?
Like, how crazy is that?
Manifestation.
It happened.
Yeah.
But I think it was also like what I had experienced at that age was just like that there was so much kind of crazy rushing around. And that it was just so difficult. And I think I saw in this person, this figure of also what's possible is that you could follow some kind of path and find some stillness in the midst of things and be content. And it felt like the most radical, amazing image. It's kind of just like seared in the most beautiful way.
So I have a question. So what is it life as a monk? Because when you say all the rushing around, because I feel like that's my life and most of our lives in here. And what is it like your day to day?
Like day to day. Well, we have a very full life. I was actually saying to someone yesterday, someone was asking me like, oh, are you busy these days? So the moment I say I'm busy these days, I want to do something else. Because for me, like busy feels like I'm doing things that I'm not connected to. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's just my feeling. And so, yeah, I have very full days, and my days are really made out of, you know, I have a really beautiful morning every morning where I wake up very early, and usually around 5, 6 o'clock, and I have this whole, we have Maine Coon cats, so I must feed the cats first, and
I love Maine Coon cats.
yeah,
I have a mutt
they're
cat. He's great.
they're hilarious, and and then I do a whole series of workouts that, I love taking care of my body. And so I've been doing boxing and a little yoga and a lot of different things that I've kind of mashed together. And then I sit with our community. And so by 8 o'clock in the morning, I feel like I've had a very nourishing day.
Mm-hmm.
And I live with my husband, and every morning before I leave the house, I always make sure I hold his face and just let him know. And I always tell him exactly how I feel about him and how much I love him.
I love
and because many years ago, I worked in emergency room. And maybe about 22 years ago, I was working in an emergency room, and it was like one story after the next that all these people had come into the emergency room because they didn't expect what was happening happen. And the people who cared, who would come rushing in to attend to them, almost always were like, I can't believe they left the house this morning without, I was angry, or I just dismissed them, or I was too busy. And so ever since then, I never want to assume that I'll see him again. So I always want to make sure that last moment is.
I love you. Yeah. That's a really good thing. And it's so simple because if we are in this rushing around world and everyone's out the door, running late for everything, and you are perhaps even angry at your partner or whoever's in the house, and you just are I have done that. And so has my husband. But it's such a good thing and such a simple thing. Because I actually do have those thoughts. Sometimes if I leave the house angry, I'm like, what if something happens? It can't end that way.
And sometimes it does.
Yeah. Is that working in, you said the ER? Or, yeah.
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 Is that how did you create the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care? Sorry. Long word.
So we created it because the true founder was my grandmother.
Oh.
Wow. And so I was her primary care partner for the last few years of her life. And so after her husband died, we made a deal, pinky promise, that we would show up for each other. And so it was through being with her and her, going from doctor's visits to hospitalizations to eventually moving in with her to the hospice. And we slept together there. And what she saw is that many of our family members and even friends of hers, her coworkers, were just so afraid. And also what she saw is that many of the doctors and nurses, she said, so many people are so well-meaning, but they don't know how to be there and show up. And she's like, you and Chodo and all these, she's like, I never thought I'd say this, but there's something to the Zens. She said, so you and Chodo should start, some kind of nonprofit organization where you bring those things together.
I've experienced a lot of trauma through death with being with my mom. I guess we'll take the conversation in this direction right now. I was with my mom a year ago for 3 days in hospice. And she had this fear of death and end of life regret. And as a monk, you learn to accept death in order to live, right? Can you explain that a little? How can you face death because there is such a fear of death in so many people. Give us advice.
It's so fascinating because the four things I know we can completely rely on are that we'll have some kind of illness, we'll age in some way, and we're going to die, and everything changes, right? So in Buddhism, the Buddha realized those four things. He's like, my goodness, like those are actually the things you can rely on. And everyone is so scared all the time, but we're scared about what actually are the four things are for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, he's like, it's almost like this kind of, it doesn't make any sense in a certain way. It's like, those are the things are for sure. And so how do you get into that relationship with those things? And I think that it's very striking that human culture for a long time has, grown around protecting us from those things.
Mm-hmm.
So even now we like put sick people in the hospital where they used to be in your home. So you'd actually be around sick people. And then we put dying people in a hospice, put them somewhere else. And we put old people in nursing homes. So like we actually removing. And so we don't actually have context. So it doesn't actually become ordinary. And so what we often do at our Zen Center, we have this really amazing training, a 9-month training called Foundations in Contemplative Care, where we're teaching people actually, so you're talking about how do you deal with the fear of death? Well, it's learning how to be awake at the bedside so that you can actually start to meet people who are dying.
Yeah.
And actually then you start to meet people who are sick and meet very elderly, frail people. And then you start to realize, oh, they're people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not this idea of like this thing that we have to kind of like, like, where is it? I don't want it to fall on me. And some people have the feel like, someone has cancer. So, like stay away from them as if it's contagious. Well, it is, but not in that way. Just like that.
Yeah.
So I think what's really important is what I experience happening with our students is that they begin to get comfortable with what they were afraid of. So their fear has a name. I was thinking about one of my friends who actually did our training, and he realized like, oh, now the fear I have is, but the person now is called Ronnie. So like they actually have a name. Like I know a dying person. And then I know another dying person. And so that it becomes more ordinary. And to me, like that's how to deal with the fear, is actually to get closer to it. And that's how we become fearless.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, obviously as you get older and a lot of death happens around us, it's so important to just be comfortable with it, because we deserve to live this life and where we are and not be in the fear. So I want to shift from death, because I feel like I talk a lot about death on this podcast, but it's the big silence. We talk about hard topics and things that people don't want to talk about. But there was something that you speak about that I think is really important right now, that a lot of my peers and everyone are asking about, which is the loneliness pandemic, and how to, what is that and how to overcome it.
Yeah. So right before the coronavirus pandemic, there was actually lots of reports in, World Health Organization talking about how loneliness is actually more dangerous than smoking.
Mm-hmm.
And it has, what are called early morbidity indicators that basically that you'll die younger if you're lonely. And I think one of the key things is about loneliness is that you can be in a marriage, you can be in a family and still feel lonely. And so it's about the depth of real relationship and the capacity to have relationships where they feel like the people really know you and can show up for you. So they have that combination of really being curious about who are you and how can I show up for you. And so I always think about, one of our teachers for our contemplative medicine fellowship is this incredible woman named Taroni Lodog. And she's a physician, an herbalist, and kind of revolution and a human being. And she, as a primary care physician, writes a prescription, which I think is a really helpful thing for people to combat loneliness. So she asks people, tell me about who will show up for you no matter what. Mm-hmm. And what she's been discovering more and more as time goes on, that people say, oh, well, my brother, he's pretty busy. There goes back to the busy. And so what she writes on a prescription pad, which she keeps some still, and is, find your five. So to me, one of the ways and to really work with this loneliness pandemic is one of them is to figure out how to build relationships. How do you cultivate a relationship where you care for someone and they care for you? And we live in a very interesting time now with, since coronavirus to now we live in a world where we can connect virtually to pretty much anybody. And we can join groups. And I know here at the Zen Center, which is not unusual, is that we have members from around the world now and who are quite involved and really regularly participate. And so we have the opportunity to really build relationships, and there are not a lot of actual barriers. But often the barriers are feeling or our fear around exposure, around trust. And so also sometimes finding the help that we need around how do we learn how to, maybe there were good, like for myself, like I know that there were great reasons in my past for not trusting and not feeling safe in groups of people. And so having some kind of practice, whether that's with therapy or some kind of meditation practice that helps you really check out, well, what's actually happening right now is that I'm having the fear or the concern or feeling distrustful, but how do I look around and say, oh, do I need to distrust this situation? Or is it just that distrust arises from me when I'm in a group? And is there something actually happening in the here and now?
Do you think with the loneliness pandemic, devices like technology and cell phones have a lot to contribute to that?
I think everything can be a tool or a weapon and somewhere between.
Yeah.
And I think the devices can bring people very close together and can make people feel very disconnected. Social media, for example, can be very connecting and a nightmare for some people, you know? And so it often is what we bring to it and how are we working with it? What's our attitude about how we're working with it? Yeah.
I want to bring out your book here, Untangled, because I was reading through it. I haven't finished it. I'm like on page 77, I think, but I'm going to finish it, and I'm so excited. So this comes out on, is it October 8th? No, November 8th. Very excited. And this is your second book, yeah? I love talking about thoughts because, of course, with meditation, it helps you with your thoughts and sitting in silence. So chapter 5, you are not just your thoughts. And obviously you quote the quote that nobody knows if it's from Buddha or Jimi Hendrix. But watch your feelings as they become your thoughts. Your thoughts become your words become your actions become your character.
Mhm.
Can we talk about thoughts and how they affect us in our mental health and how we can direct them in the right, like what tools do we need to direct them in a positive place?
Totally. I think that, our brain, which is around 5 pound organ in our head, gets a lot of airtime,
Mm-hmm.
and we give it a lot of space for even identity. And so the brain's job, like the heart's job, is to, pump away, and our lungs' job is to, open and close so that we can get air. And the brain's job is to interpret things.
Mm-hmm.
And the brain is not very creative. And so it tends to kind of get into these grooves where we don't think new things. And so our thoughts, we tend to be looking at things, and what we're seeing is what we usually see. And so there's this great story that I love very much where, this young person comes to a Zen teacher in Japan, to a little town, and they said, "Oh, we're moving to this town. What's this town like?" And the Zen teacher said, "Well, tell me about what it's like where you've been." And the person says, "Oh, it's terrible. People are nasty, and everyone's unpleasant, and no one gets along or helps each other." And the teacher said, "Oh, it's just like that here." And then the next person comes to see the Zen teacher and says, "Oh, what's this town like? I'm going to move here." And he says, "Oh, what was your other town like?" And they're like, "Oh, everyone was so wonderful. And, everyone's really helping each other out and really showing up for each other." He's like, "Oh, this town is just like that."
Mm-hmm.
So we often, with our thoughts, will be interpreting where we go in the same way. If we feel like, in general, like our mood is that things are unpleasant or things don't work out for me, we're going to be walk into a new room and somehow interpreting through that lens.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so what's so incredible is that we can actually learn to notice that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my goodness, I'm doing that same old thing.
How would you tell someone listening, like, how do you recognize it and then shift it and turn around so that you're not are just your thoughts and you can change your thoughts and change your reality?
Yeah. So one of my favorite practices is like a practice slogan in a way. And so you have a thought, recognize the thought, like, for example, walking outside and it's raining, and we all have some automatic response to some weather condition. Oh, terrible, it's raining. Or, I'm so glad it's raining. And I like to ask myself the question, what else is true about rain? And then, well, it's probably good for the plants.
Mm-hmm.
And then say, what else is true? And so it's just to begin to open it up, because very often with our thoughts, they make things, it's almost like what anxiety itself does to the pupils of our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
When we're very anxious and our thoughts are kind of closed down, it does sort of the same thing, because very closed feeling and thoughts create our reality. So literally our pupils become smaller. And so less light actually comes in when we're so tight with our thoughts. And it causes anxiety. And so learning how to kind of literally open your shoulders and say, what else is true, is actually changes our biology too.
I love that. As someone who has a lot of anxiety in the most recent years, that is one of the things that I do to overcome it, is think about like what is actually real right now. And in my head, I'm like, you are safe. You are safe. And like shifting those thoughts so that, your thoughts affect your body and in so many ways. And yeah, shifting thoughts. And what's your best tip for meditation? Or what do you do? First of all, what do you do for meditation? And what would your tip be for someone who is afraid of meditation?
Well, what I do is I sit with whatever's available. Sometimes it's a chair, sometimes it's a cushion on the ground. We call it zafu. And, to me, actually, what I encourage, and which is what I do too, is so right now I'm sitting on the floor and talking to you. And what I like to do is I really feel my sit bones. And so kind of rocking back and forth, and really it's like, oh, right, there's like actual bones happening there, and feeling the ground. So feeling grounded, and, bringing my hips a little bit forward, tilting them forward so that my lower back has a little bit of an arch. It's a pretty sweet spot, and which also sticks our belly out a little bit. And so, and allowing my belly to be soft and shoulders open, and just gazing down in front of me. So for me, this is actually the posture for Zazen, or seated Zen meditation. And I feel like it's such a great model for how I want to live in the world, which is grounded, soft, open, and upright and present. And so what I always encourage people to do is to find a practice that works enough for them, because every practice is a little funky, and count the things that you can count on is it's going to get hard, and it's going to get challenging, and you'll be disappointed, and to keep on going. There was a study done about why people stop meditation, because they try it out for a little while and they didn't get better. So it's not designed for you to get better. It's designed to actually, so that you have this incredible ground to return to no matter what is happening.
Yeah.
Oh, can I tell a quick story?
Oh, yes, of course.
So Jack Kornfield tells this great story where where he was in the Miami airport, and this guy came running up to him. He's like, "You're Jack Kornfield," and he's like, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am." And he's like, "Yeah, I went on some meditation thing with you, like a night or something, 20 years ago." And he was like, "Oh, is that so? And how was that?" And he's like, "It was awful." He's like, "I couldn't figure it out. It was too complicated. I was really bad at it." But he said, "You know what was amazing is that last year when I was having open heart surgery, it was I could hear your voice. And it was the only thing that made sense to me, to actually come back to my breath, find my ground, and be upright." And it's like, and ever since then, I've been meditating. So it's like...
It's true. And so meditation has taught me, and again, anyone listening, there is no perfect way to meditate. It's just a practice, and you keep doing it. And change is uncomfortable, and it will be uncomfortable. And that sometimes it's really hard. And then sometimes it's like, wow, that was so easy, and I feel amazing. But there's been in moments of severe, driving to the ER myself because I had an allergic reaction. And I literally was just like, I used meditation. It's like, breathe in. Just learning breath can really carry you through a lot of stressful moments. And, it's been something that can save you and get you through so much. It's just the breath. Yeah. Mind and breath connection. But so is there anything else you want to share aside from, we're going to put all the links in the info, the show notes of how to find you and your amazing book that's coming out. Anything else you want to share?
Well, I think that the one thing I would like to share is that we only have so much time in this life. I know what it means to suffer. And to me, the beauty is finding community with others who you can suffer with and work with our suffering to change it. And so I feel like we have to start by really honoring that we struggle, we feel tangled up, we feel overwhelmed, and we can do something about that.
Yeah, and I love that. And not necessarily being a victim, but taking that victim mentality and what you've struggled through and turning it into a purpose and something beautiful.
And to be curious about what else is true.
Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you, Koshin, for being here. I appreciate it. Next time I'm in New York, I'm going to come to your Zen Center.
Totally.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
The big silence. The big silence.